My name is Brielle Harper, and I am 34 years old. I never imagined the people who once let me cry alone would someday sit across from me crying themselves. But that's exactly what happened. My father's voice trembled as he looked at me and said something I had never heard him say before. "Please, Brielle." For a second, I honestly thought I had heard him wrong. This was the same man who spent my entire childhood reminding me that I mattered less because I was a daughter. The same man who chose my brother over me every single time. Now he was begging. My mother sat beside him, wiping tears from her face. My younger brother Garrett stared at the floor, unable to look me in the eye. They had lost everything. And I was their last hope. Then the office door opened. A teenage girl walked in carrying her school bag. "Mom, can we stop for ice cream on the way home?" The moment my mother saw her, she gasped. "Paisley." The room went silent. The granddaughter they abandoned. The little girl they once refused to save. And suddenly, all three of them looked like they wanted the floor to swallow them whole. What happened next shocked everyone in that room. But before I tell you how the people who treated me like I didn't matter ended up begging for my help, welcome to her revenge stories. If this story resonates with you, do me a favor, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. And tell me in the comments, what time is it where you're watching from? I grew up in a wealthy family. From the outside, our lives looked perfect. We lived in a large house in one of the nicest neighborhoods in Illinois. We took family vacations every summer. My parents owned several successful businesses. There was always food on the table, expensive cars in the driveway, and people constantly telling us how lucky we were. But the truth was, I spent most of my childhood feeling like a guest in my own home. The problem wasn't money. The problem was me. I was born a daughter. My younger brother, Garrett, was born a son. And in my parents' eyes, that made all the difference. Some of my earliest memories are of sitting at the dinner table listening to my father talk about Garrett's future. He'll carry the Harper name. One day he'll take over everything. Everything we're building is for him. At first, I didn't think much about it. I was just a little girl. But as the years passed, I started noticing something. Nobody ever talked about my future. Nobody ever asked what I wanted to become. Nobody ever talked about investing in me. Whenever I asked why, my mother always gave the same answer. "A daughter belongs to another family someday. You'll get married and leave. Garrett is our legacy." I remember one Christmas when I was 9 years old. I had spent weeks talking about a telescope I wanted. I loved science back then. I was fascinated by the stars. Every day after school, I would sit by my bedroom window and read books about planets and galaxies. Christmas morning finally arrived. I rushed downstairs full of excitement. Garrett tore through a mountain of presents. A gaming console. A bicycle. Remote-controlled cars. Brand new sneakers. When I opened my gifts, I found a few sweaters and a journal. I smiled and thanked my parents anyway. But later that day, I overheard my father talking to my mother. "Why spend hundreds on a hobby she'll probably forget?" That hurt more than not getting the telescope. Because deep down, I knew it wasn't about the telescope. It was about me. As we got older, the favoritism became impossible to ignore. When Garrett forgot his homework, my parents laughed and called him absent-minded. When I brought home a B instead of an A, I was lectured for days. When Garrett joined the basketball team, my parents attended every game. When I won an academic competition, neither of them showed up. I still remember standing on a stage at 14 years old holding a trophy while scanning the audience. Every seat around me was filled with proud parents. Mine were nowhere to be found. I told myself they were probably busy. But later that evening, I found out they had skipped the event to attend one of Garrett's practices. A practice. Not even a game. That was the night I cried myself to sleep. And unfortunately, it wasn't the last. The older Garrett became, the more entitled he got. He quickly learned that no matter what happened, our parents would choose him. And he wasn't shy about reminding me. Whenever I achieved something, he found a way to tear it down. Whenever I got excited about a goal, he joked about how it didn't matter. Sometimes he didn't even try to hide it. One evening, I overheard him bragging to his friends. My parents would never say no to me. Then he laughed. My sister knows her place. I stood frozen outside the room. I don't think I've ever forgotten those words. My sister knows her place. The worst part? He was right. Because by then, I had started believing it too. Every rejection. Every excuse. Every reminder that Garrett mattered more. It slowly chipped away at my confidence. I stopped asking for things. Stopped sharing my dreams. Stopped expecting support. And somewhere along the way, I started believing the lie my parents had spent years teaching me. That I was temporary. That I wasn't worth investing in. That I would never truly belong. By the time I became an adult, I wasn't just lonely. I was desperate. Desperate for someone, anyone, to choose me. And looking back now, that's exactly what made me vulnerable to the mistakes that changed the course of my life. The favoritism became impossible to ignore when I was 17. Up until then, I had spent years making excuses for my parents. Maybe they were busy. Maybe they were stressed. Maybe I was being too sensitive. But the older I got, the harder it became to explain away what was happening. During my junior year of high school, something incredible happened. One afternoon, I was called into the principal's office. At first, I thought I was in trouble. Instead, the principal handed me a large envelope and smiled. "Brielle, congratulations." Inside was an acceptance letter to one of the most respected youth leadership programs in the country. Thousands of students had applied. Only a small number were selected. The program included mentorship opportunities, leadership training, college preparation, and networking with students from across the nation. I could barely believe it. For the first time in years, I felt proud of myself. The program cost $8,000. A lot of money, yes. But not for my family. My parents spent more than that on vacations without thinking twice. I remember driving home with the letter sitting on the passenger seat beside me. The entire way, I imagined my parents being proud. Maybe this would finally be the moment they saw me. Maybe this would finally be the moment they realized I mattered too. That evening, I waited until everyone sat down for dinner. My hands were shaking as I pulled the letter from my backpack. "I got accepted," I said excitedly. Nobody responded at first. My father continued eating. My mother glanced at the paper. Garrett barely looked up from his phone. I forced a smile and continued. "It's one of the top leadership programs in the country." I slid the letter toward them. My father finally picked it up. For a brief second, I felt hopeful. Then he laughed. Actually laughed. Not because he was happy. Because he thought the idea was ridiculous. "We're not spending that kind of money on a daughter." The room suddenly felt very small. I stared at him. Waiting for him to realize how hurtful that sounded. Waiting for him to take it back. He didn't. Instead, he pushed the letter across the table as if it were a bill he didn't want to pay. Then Garrett smirked. Even now, years later, I can still see that expression. Why waste money on someone who's leaving anyway? My mother nodded. Almost casually. As harsh as it sounds, he's right. I don't remember finishing dinner. I don't remember what happened after that conversation. What I do remember is sitting alone in my bedroom later that night, staring at the acceptance letter. Reading it over and over again. Trying to understand why earning something wasn't enough. Trying to understand why being their daughter automatically made me less important. A few weeks later, I declined the offer. Not because I wanted to. Because I had no choice. I told my friends I wasn't interested. That was easier than telling them the truth. The following year hurt even more. I had just turned 18. I was working part-time after school and saving every dollar I could. My old car had finally stopped running. Actually, calling it my car was generous. It was a rusted hand-me-down from a distant relative. One afternoon, I asked my parents if they could help me buy a reliable used car. Nothing expensive. Just something safe enough to get me to work and school. My father didn't even let me finish. No. That was it. No explanation. No discussion. Just no. 3 months later, Garrett turned 16. The entire family gathered in the driveway. Friends. Relatives. Neighbors. Everyone was there. Then my parents pulled a giant cover off a brand new SUV. A beautiful vehicle worth more than $42,000. People cheered. Garrett jumped up and down. My mother cried happy tears. My father handed him the keys like he was handing over a kingdom. I stood there silently. Watching. Trying not to let anyone see how much it hurt. Then Garrett walked over to me. Spinning the keys around his finger. You can sit in it if you want. He laughed. It's probably the closest you'll ever get to owning something Dad paid for. Everyone laughed. Nobody corrected him. Nobody defended me. And in that moment, something inside me changed. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Just quietly. I stopped expecting fairness. I stopped hoping they would change. And for the first time, I started looking for love and validation somewhere outside my family. Looking back now, that decision would lead me straight into the next chapter of my life. And straight toward the biggest mistake I would ever make. After years of feeling invisible in my own home, something inside me started changing. Looking back now, I can see exactly what was happening. I wasn't searching for love. I was searching for validation. I wanted someone, anyone, to choose me. To make me feel important. To make me feel like I belonged somewhere. Because at home, I never did. My parents had spent years convincing me that I was temporary. That one day I would leave. That everything worth building belonged to Garrett. And eventually, I started trying to find my worth in other people. The first person was Mason. I met him a few months after my 18th birthday. He was charming. Funny. Confident. The kind of guy who could walk into a room and immediately become the center of attention. The first time he asked me out, I remember feeling butterflies. Not because I knew him well. Because someone had chosen me. For the first few weeks, everything felt perfect. He texted me every morning. Called me beautiful. Introduced me to his friends. For the first time in my life, I felt special. I felt seen. I remember lying awake at night smiling at text messages. Thinking maybe this was what happiness felt like. Then one afternoon, everything fell apart. A girl approached me outside a coffee shop. At first, I thought she was asking for directions. Instead, she asked a question. How long have you been dating Mason? My stomach dropped. Within minutes, I discovered the truth. I wasn't his girlfriend. I was one of several girlfriends. The entire relationship had been a lie. When I confronted him, he didn't even apologize. He laughed. Then he said something I'll never forget. You're acting like we're married. That relationship ended the same day. But the damage remained. Because every rejection seemed to confirm what I already believed. That I wasn't enough. A few months later, I met Trevor. Trevor was completely different. Quiet. Intelligent. Ambitious. Unlike Mason, he didn't shower me with compliments. Instead, he talked about goals. Dreams. The future. I convinced myself he was mature. For a while, things seemed healthy. Then I started noticing a pattern. Whenever Trevor called, he needed something. A ride. Money. Help with a project. A favor. At first, I didn't mind. I wanted to be supportive. But eventually, I realized something. Whenever I needed him, he was nowhere to be found. One night I called him crying after another argument with my parents. He didn't answer. The next day, he called asking if I could lend him money. That was the moment everything became clear. I wasn't his girlfriend. I was convenient. And once again, my heart broke. The third relationship was probably the worst. His name was Chase. Chase was exciting. Unpredictable. The kind of guy who always had a story to tell. With him, life felt like an adventure. Road trips. Late-night drives. Spontaneous plans. For a while, I loved it. But eventually I realized Chase treated life like a game. Including relationships. He would disappear for days without explanation. Cancel plans at the last minute. Flirt openly with other women. Then act like I was overreacting when I got upset. One evening, after waiting hours for him at a restaurant, I finally called. He answered laughing. He had completely forgotten we had plans. Forgotten. Just like that. Something inside me shattered. Not because of Chase. Not because of Mason. Not because of Trevor. Because suddenly I realized none of these relationships were actually about love. I wasn't choosing people who valued me. I was choosing people who gave me temporary attention. And every time they pulled it away, I chased harder. Desperate not to be abandoned again. The truth was painful. I wasn't looking for a boyfriend anymore. I was looking for a family. Somewhere I finally mattered. Somewhere someone would choose me and keep choosing me. And that desperation made me vulnerable. More vulnerable than I realized. Because shortly afterward, I met a man who seemed to offer exactly what I had been searching for. A man who promised commitment. Stability. Marriage. A future. At the time, he felt like an answer to every prayer. I had no idea he was about to become the biggest mistake of my life. Then I met Blake Turner. Even now, part of me wishes I had never answered that first message. But at the time, Blake seemed like everything I had been searching for. He was older than me by a few years. Confident without being arrogant. Attentive without being overwhelming. And unlike the men I had dated before, he seemed serious. From the beginning, Blake talked about things no one else had talked about. Marriage. Commitment. Building a future. Having a family. Those words hit me differently. Because deep down, family was all I had ever wanted. Not money. Not luxury. Not status. Just a place where I belonged. A place where I mattered. And Blake seemed determined to give me exactly that. He remembered little things I told him. He brought me coffee when I worked late. He listened when I talked about my childhood. When I told him about the favoritism in my family, he shook his head and said, "I would never treat someone I love that way." Looking back, that sentence should have scared me. People who truly love you don't usually have to announce it. But I was young. Lonely. and desperate to believe him. A few months later, Blake suggested that we move in together. It was fast. Too fast. But I convinced myself that love was supposed to feel certain. So I packed my things and moved into his apartment. What hurt most wasn't leaving. It was realizing nobody cared. My parents didn't try to stop me. They didn't ask questions. They didn't check if I was safe. My mother simply said, "You're an adult. Do whatever you want." And that was it. Years of raising me. And that was all she had to say. Part of me hoped they would call. They never did. For a while, living with Blake felt like freedom. We cooked dinner together. Watched movies. Talked about the future. I genuinely believed I had finally found my place in the world. Then little things started changing. At first, it was subtle. He didn't like certain friends. Didn't like certain clothes. Didn't like how often I worked. Whenever I disagreed with him, he would sulk for days. Then came the criticism. "You overthink everything. Why are you always so emotional? Nobody wants to hear you complain." The man who once listened to me for hours suddenly seemed annoyed by everything I said. The relationship slowly became exhausting. I found myself apologizing constantly. Walking on eggshells. Trying not to upset him. Then the insults started. He called me immature. Said I was lucky he stayed with me. Suggested no one else would ever put up with me. The worst part was that I believed him. Because those words sounded so similar to the things I had heard growing up. And then came the moment that changed everything. I found out I was pregnant. I remember staring at the test in complete shock. Terrified. But also excited. For the first time, I imagined building my own family. The family I never had. When Blake came home that evening, I told him. At first, he didn't say anything. He just stared at me. The silence felt wrong. Very wrong. Minutes passed. Then he stood up and walked away. Over the following weeks, he became colder. More distant. More irritated. Every conversation turned into an argument. Then one night, after another fight, he finally said what he had been thinking all along. "I'm not ready for this." I felt my stomach drop. What does that mean? It means this isn't what I signed up for. A week later, he handed me a bag containing some of my belongings. Just a bag. No apology. No discussion. No concern. Nothing. I stood outside his apartment holding my things, one hand resting on my stomach. Pregnant. Homeless. Heartbroken. And completely alone. As Blake closed the door behind me, I realized something terrifying. The family I thought I had found never existed. And now I had no idea what I was going to do next. The day Blake threw me out, I sat in my car for almost 2 hours. I didn't cry right away. I think I was too shocked. My entire future had just disappeared, and I couldn't even process it. The sun had already set by the time I finally started the engine. I had nowhere to go. And the truth was, even though my parents lived less than an hour away, asking them for help never crossed my mind. Years of rejection had taught me exactly what answer I would get. So I figured it out on my own. A week later, I moved into a tiny one-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. The carpet was stained. The kitchen was barely big enough to stand in. The heating system made strange noises at night. But it was mine. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't depending on anyone else. The problem was money. Every dollar mattered. Every single one. I worked wherever I could find work. In the mornings, I stocked shelves at a grocery store. In the afternoons, I worked at a wholesale distribution company, organizing inventory and helping process shipments. At night, I cleaned office buildings. Some days I worked so many hours that my feet felt numb. There were nights I came home exhausted and fell asleep without even taking off my shoes. The pregnancy made everything harder. My back hurt constantly. My ankles swelled. I was always tired. But I kept going. Because I wasn't working for myself anymore. I was working for my baby. I started saving every dollar I could. I stopped buying coffee. Stopped eating out. Stopped spending money on anything that wasn't necessary. Sometimes I skipped meals altogether. I would tell myself I wasn't hungry. But the truth was, I was trying to stretch every dollar as far as possible. There were nights when dinner was nothing more than crackers and water. And yet, whenever I placed my hand on my stomach and felt my baby move, I reminded myself why I was doing it. She was worth every sacrifice. One afternoon, when I was about 7 months pregnant, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. It was one of my mother's friends. Somehow, word had gotten back to my parents. They knew. They knew I was pregnant. For the first time in months, hope appeared. Maybe becoming grandparents would change them. Maybe this baby would soften their hearts. Maybe they would finally see me differently. For days, I kept checking my phone. Waiting for a call. Waiting for a message. Waiting for something. Then a letter arrived. Not a phone call. Not a visit. A letter. I remember sitting at my kitchen table staring at the envelope. My hands were shaking as I opened it. At first, I thought maybe it contained an apology. Maybe concern. Maybe love. Instead, it contained judgment. The letter was short. Cold. Cruel. My mother wrote that she wasn't surprised. She said she always knew I would ruin my life. She said I had embarrassed the Harper family. She said I had proven everything they feared about me. Not once did she ask if I was okay. Not once did she ask about the baby. Not once did she offer help. When I finished reading, I sat there staring at the wall. The apartment felt painfully quiet. I don't remember how long I cried that night. Hours, probably. But eventually I folded the letter, put it in a drawer, and made a decision. If my daughter was going to have a family, I would be that family. Months later, after a long and difficult labor, my baby girl finally arrived. I named her Paisley. The moment the nurse placed her in my arms, something changed inside me. She was tiny. Perfect. Beautiful. She wrapped her little fingers around mine, and suddenly none of the pain mattered anymore. Not Blake. Not my parents. Not the loneliness. Nothing. For the first time in my life, I felt truly loved. And for the first time in my life, I knew exactly where I belonged. I was Paisley's mother. That was enough. For 3 beautiful weeks, I allowed myself to believe everything would be okay. Then one morning, I noticed something wasn't right. Paisley wasn't feeding normally. Her breathing seemed different. Faster. Strained. At first, I told myself I was overreacting. A nervous first-time mother. But deep down, I felt it. Something was wrong. Very wrong. And I was about to discover just how quickly happiness can disappear. The happiest weeks of my life ended with a single phone call. One moment, I was holding Paisley in my arms, humming softly while she slept against my chest. The next, I was racing to the emergency room with tears streaming down my face. It started on a Tuesday morning. Paisley wasn't feeding properly. She seemed unusually tired. Her tiny breathing sounded strained, almost like she was working too hard just to take in air. At first, I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Every new parent worries. Every new parent panics. But something in my gut told me this was different. By that afternoon, her lips had started taking on a faint bluish color. That's when fear took over. I grabbed her diaper bag, wrapped her in a blanket, and drove straight to the hospital. The drive felt endless. I kept looking into the rearview mirror. Watching her. Praying. Begging God not to take her from me. The emergency room staff moved quickly. Doctors took her from my arms. Nurses rushed around me. Machines beeped. People spoke in medical terms I didn't understand. Hours passed. Then came more tests. And more waiting. I don't think I've ever been as scared as I was that night. Finally, a doctor walked into the consultation room. I knew something was wrong before he even spoke. The expression on his face said everything. He sat down beside me. "Brielle," he said gently, "your daughter has a severe congenital heart defect." For a second, the words didn't register. I just stared at him. Waiting for him to explain. Waiting for him to tell me there had been a mistake. There wasn't. He explained that Paisley's heart hadn't developed properly before birth. Without corrective surgery, her condition would continue to worsen. And eventually. He didn't have to finish the sentence. I already understood. My baby was dying. The room started spinning. I remember gripping the armrests of the chair because I thought I might collapse. Then I asked the only question that mattered. "Can you save her?" The doctor nodded. Yes. For the first time that day, I felt hope. Then he told me the cost. The surgery would require specialists, intensive care, and extensive treatment. The total estimate was approximately $85,000. The hope disappeared just as quickly as it had arrived. I didn't have $85,000. I didn't have $8,000. I barely had enough money to cover rent. Still, I refused to give up. Over the next 3 days, I became obsessed. I sold everything I owned that had any value. Jewelry. Electronics. Furniture. Anything. I applied for every loan I could find. Banks rejected me. Credit unions rejected me. Private lenders rejected me. I borrowed money from friends. Asked coworkers for help. Called people I hadn't spoken to in years. Every morning I woke up believing I would find a solution. Every night I went to sleep terrified. Meanwhile, Paisley remained in the hospital. Tiny tubes connected to her body. Machines monitoring every heartbeat. Every breath. Every day she looked smaller. Weaker. More fragile. Then came the worst conversation of all. The doctor sat me down again. This time his voice was more serious. "We need to move quickly." "How quickly?" I asked. He looked down at the chart. Then back at me. 5 days. The words hit me like a truck. 5 days. That was all I had. 5 days to somehow find $85,000. 5 days to save my daughter's life. 5 days before the situation became critical. That night, I sat beside Paisley's hospital bed long after visiting hours ended. She was sleeping peacefully. Completely unaware that her future was hanging by a thread. I held her tiny hand and cried quietly. Not because I was weak. Because I was running out of options. I had exhausted every possibility. Every resource. Every contact. There was only one place left to go. One place I had avoided my entire adult life. My parents. The same parents who had never chosen me. The same parents who always chose Garrett. The same parents who had more than enough money to save their granddaughter if they wanted to. The thought of asking them made me sick. But as I looked at Paisley lying in that hospital bed, I realized something. My pride didn't matter anymore. My pain didn't matter anymore. Nothing mattered except my daughter. And if begging my parents was what it took to save her life, then that was exactly what I was prepared to do. I don't think I have ever been more terrified than I was the day I drove to my parents' house. The entire drive, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. On the passenger seat beside me sat a folder containing Paisley's medical reports. Every test result. Every doctor's note. Every estimate. Everything proving that my baby girl was running out of time. I kept rehearsing what I was going to say. How I would explain it. How I would convince them. Because despite everything that had happened between us, I still believed there was one thing they wouldn't do. I believed they wouldn't let their granddaughter die. I was wrong. When I arrived, my parents were sitting in their living room. The television was on. My mother was scrolling through her phone. My father was reading business reports. Neither looked particularly happy to see me. But I didn't care. There wasn't time for pride. There wasn't time for old wounds. There was only Paisley. I placed the folder on the coffee table. My voice cracked almost immediately. Please. That single word carried years of pain. Years of disappointment. Years of rejection. But mostly, it carried fear. I opened the folder and showed them everything. The diagnosis. The scans. The treatment plan. The surgery estimate. The doctor's warning. Then I showed them the deadline. 5 days. At that point, there were only 3 days left. I remember looking directly at my mother. Tears running down my face. My baby is dying. Please help me save her. For a moment, nobody spoke. My mother slowly closed the folder. Then she looked directly at me. Her expression didn't change. There was no compassion. No concern. No grandmotherly instinct. Nothing. Then she said the words that still haunt me. Your daughter isn't our responsibility. The room went silent. I genuinely thought I had heard her wrong. I stared at her. Waiting. Expecting her to take it back. She didn't. Then my father put down his papers and looked at me. Not with sympathy. With annoyance. Maybe if you'd spent less time chasing men and more time building a future, you wouldn't be here begging. The words hit harder than I can describe. Because they weren't talking about a mistake. They weren't talking about me. They were talking about a 3-week-old baby fighting for her life. I completely broke down. I cried. I begged. I offered to repay every dollar. I promised monthly payments. I promised contracts. I promised anything. Nothing mattered. Then Garrett walked into the room. For one brief moment, I felt hope. Maybe he would help. Maybe seeing me like that would finally change something. He looked at the folder. He saw the reports. He saw the diagnosis. He saw the deadline. He heard the amount. $85,000. He knew exactly what was happening. And he said absolutely nothing. Not one word. Not even a question about Paisley. Just silence. I left that house feeling numb. Not angry. Not yet. Just empty. The next 2 days were torture. Paisley grew weaker. Every time a machine beeped in her hospital room, my heart jumped. Every hour felt precious. Every minute felt borrowed. Then, on the second day, I made the mistake of opening social media. One post immediately caught my attention. It was from my mother's account. There were balloons everywhere. Music. Guests. Expensive decorations. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then I saw Garrett standing in the middle of the room smiling. It was his birthday celebration. A massive party. The kind of party people spend months planning. My stomach tightened. Then I kept scrolling. And that's when I saw it. A brand new Mercedes-Benz S-Class. Black. Shiny. Perfect. A giant red bow sat on the hood. The caption beneath the photo read, "Anything for our son and future legacy." My eyes immediately moved to the article linked underneath. The vehicle's value was listed there. $87,000. I checked again. Then again. $87,000. Almost exactly what Paisley's surgery required. The same parents who claimed they didn't have $85,000 had just spent $87,000 on a birthday gift. My daughter was dying. And they chose a luxury car. I don't remember making it back inside the hospital. I only remember sitting alone in the lobby. Crying harder than I had ever cried in my life. Everything hurt. My chest. My head. My heart. I felt completely defeated. For the first time, I honestly thought I was going to lose my daughter. That was when someone sat down beside me. An older man. Well-dressed. Professional. But kind. He didn't immediately ask questions. He simply handed me a box of tissues. A few minutes later, he introduced himself. Leon Mercer. I told him everything. The favoritism. My parents. Garrett. The surgery. The car. The betrayal. By the time I finished, neither of us was speaking. Then Leon quietly stood up. He reached into his jacket pocket. Pulled out a business card. And said something I will never forget. "Let's save your daughter." The next few days felt unreal. Leon covered the cost of the surgery. The doctors moved quickly. Specialists were brought in. And after hours that felt like years, a surgeon finally walked into the waiting room. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. Then he smiled. The surgery was successful. I collapsed into tears. Not tears of fear this time. Tears of relief. My daughter was alive. Paisley survived. And at that moment, I made myself a promise. No matter how hard life became after that, I would never forget who showed up when my child needed saving. And I would never forget who didn't. After Paisley's surgery, life didn't suddenly become easy. In fact, in many ways, the real battle was only beginning. For weeks, I barely left the hospital. Every beep from a machine made me nervous. Every doctor's visit made my heart race. Even after Paisley was discharged, I found myself waking up several times each night just to make sure she was breathing. Trauma does that to people. You survive the crisis, but the fear stays behind. Leon understood that better than I did. A few months after the surgery, he invited me to lunch. At first, I thought he wanted an update on Paisley. Instead, he surprised me. He told me something that changed my life. "Brielle, you survived something most people wouldn't. But surviving isn't the same as healing." A week later, he paid for a full year of counseling. At first, I resisted. I thought therapy was for people who were falling apart. Then I realized something. I had been falling apart for years. I just hid it well. Week after week, I sat in a small office and unpacked years of pain. The favoritism. The rejection. The loneliness. The abandonment. For the first time, I stopped blaming myself for everything that had happened. For the first time, I understood that my parents' choices were not a reflection of my worth. That realization changed everything. When the counseling program ended, Leon helped me one final time. He gave me a small business loan. $10,000. Not enough to change my life overnight, but enough to give me a chance. I still remember what he said when he handed me the paperwork. This isn't enough to make you rich. It's enough to help you bet on yourself. And that's exactly what I did. During my pregnancy, I had worked at a wholesale distribution company. Most people ignored jobs like that. I didn't. I paid attention. I learned how products moved, how inventory worked, how suppliers negotiated, how businesses made money. So I took everything I had learned and started small. Very small. At first, I operated out of a rented storage unit. My office was basically a folding table and a second-hand laptop. Some days I packed orders with Paisley sleeping in a portable crib beside me. Some nights I worked until 2 in the morning. Then woke up again at 6. I made mistakes. Expensive mistakes. One supplier disappeared with several $1,000s. A shipment got delayed and nearly cost me an important contract. There were months when I genuinely thought everything was going to collapse. More than once, I sat at my kitchen table staring at unpaid bills and wondering if I should quit. But every time I looked at Paisley, I kept going. Slowly, things started changing. 1 customer became 3. 3 became 10. 10 became 50. The storage unit became a warehouse. The warehouse became 2 warehouses. Then 3. Years passed. My company grew beyond anything I had imagined. For the first time in my life, I wasn't surviving. I was building, creating, leading. And eventually, success followed. The girl who once couldn't afford groceries became a successful business owner. Then an executive. Then a millionaire. But the thing I was most proud of wasn't the money. It was what I did with it. I created the Mercer Harper Foundation. Named after the man who gave me a chance and the daughter who gave me a reason to fight. The foundation helped struggling families. Single parents. Small business owners. People facing emergencies. People who had nowhere else to turn. Because I knew exactly what it felt like to have nobody. While my life was moving forward, Garrett's life was moving in the opposite direction. My parents continued treating him like he could do no wrong. Whenever one business failed, they funded another. Whenever he lost money, they replaced it. Whenever he made bad decisions, they rescued him. They spent years protecting him from consequences. And eventually, the consequences became too big to avoid. One failed business turned into another. Then another. Debt piled up. Investments disappeared. Properties were sold. Savings accounts emptied. The Harper fortune slowly crumbled. The same fortune my parents had spent decades protecting for their legacy. Eventually, there was almost nothing left. The businesses were gone. The money was gone. Most of the properties were gone. The only thing remaining was the family home. Then the bank came for that too. Desperate and running out of options, my parents began searching for help. That's when they heard about a foundation known for helping people who had nowhere else to turn. The Mercer Harper Foundation. Without realizing who owned it, they submitted an application. Weeks later, they were invited to present their case. And that's how the people who spent their entire lives telling me I didn't matter ended up sitting across from me in that office. Begging the daughter they never valued to save them. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The office felt completely silent. Garrett stood there staring at Paisley as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The little girl he had once heard me beg for. The little girl everyone thought wouldn't survive. Now she was standing right there. Healthy. Confident. Smiling. Alive. His voice came out barely above a whisper. "That's the baby." I looked at him. Then I nodded. "Yes. The baby whose life was worth less than your birthday present." The words landed harder than I expected. Garrett lowered his head. My mother started crying again. My father looked away. For the first time in my life, nobody had an excuse. Nobody had a defense. Nobody could pretend they didn't know what they had done. The meeting ended shortly afterward. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The following morning, there was a knock at my front door. I already knew who it was. Something told me. When I opened the door, there they stood. My father. My mother. Garrett. The people who had spent years making me feel like I didn't matter. The people who had watched me struggle. The people who had chosen a car over my daughter's life. Now they looked completely different. Their expensive clothes were gone. The confidence was gone. The arrogance was gone. Life had finally humbled them. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then my father cleared his throat. "We need to talk." I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. The air was cool. The neighborhood was quiet. And for some reason, I felt calmer than I ever expected. Maybe because I wasn't afraid of them anymore. Maybe because they no longer had power over me. Finally, my father spoke. "We're family." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was unbelievable. After everything. After all those years. That was his argument. Family. I looked him straight in the eye. No. The word hung in the air. My mother immediately started crying. But I continued. Family was the granddaughter you abandoned. Family was the daughter you treated as disposable. Nobody interrupted. Nobody denied it. Because they couldn't. The truth was standing right in front of them. Then my father said something that honestly didn't surprise me. "The Harper name will disappear if Garrett loses everything." There it was. The same obsession. The same belief. The same mistake. After all these years, he still didn't understand. I smiled. Not because I was happy. Because the irony was impossible to ignore. You spent your whole life protecting the Harper name. I spent mine building a family worth protecting. The silence that followed felt heavy. Garrett finally looked at me. For once, there was no arrogance. No sarcasm. No superiority. Just desperation. "So you're not going to help us?" I looked at all three of them. And suddenly every memory came rushing back. The leadership program they refused to pay for. The opportunities they gave Garrett. The letter my mother sent during my pregnancy. The hospital room. The 5-day deadline. The medical reports. The Mercedes. The caption. "Anything for our son and future legacy." I took a deep breath. Then gave them the answer they deserved. 10 years ago, my daughter needed help to live. Today, you need help to keep your lifestyle. Those aren't the same thing. Nobody spoke. There was nothing left to say. I turned around and walked back toward my house. Behind me, I could hear my mother crying. I could hear my father calling my name. I could hear Garrett asking me to wait. But I kept walking. Because for years I had begged people to choose me. To love me. To value me. And now I finally understood something. The people who truly love you never make you beg for your worth. When I stepped inside, Paisley was sitting at the kitchen counter finishing her homework. She looked up and smiled. "Everything okay, Mom?" I smiled back. For the first time in a long time, I genuinely meant it. "Yeah. Everything's okay. That night, as I watched my daughter laughing over dinner, I realized something. The greatest revenge wasn't becoming wealthy. It wasn't watching the people who hurt me lose everything. It wasn't even saying no. The greatest revenge was building the life they said I could never have. And building it without them. Maybe that's the lesson in all of this. Sometimes the people who share your blood aren't the people who stand by you. And sometimes strangers become the family that saves your life. So let me ask you something. If you were in my position, would you have helped them? Do you think Brielle made the right decision, or should she have forgiven her parents and Garrett after everything they did? I'd really love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if this story touched you in any way, please take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share this story with someone who might need to hear it. Because sometimes one story can remind someone of their worth. And sometimes that's exactly what they need. The end.